An important task of any successful space manager is to understand and communicate the usage of the company's space. However, sometimes simple seat assignments are not enough to truly understand whether space is being used effectively. Perhaps the assigned employee spends most of their time working from home or using flex space in another building. To get an accurate picture of how space is being used, it can be helpful to have someone on the ground surveying. Let's take a look at how we might plan and execute a space survey campaign and what we might learn from the results. In this video, we will see how to create a survey campaign, and we'll see how surveyors collect information. Finally, we'll see some examples of how we can make use of the information to present to the decision makers in the company. We'll start here on the space management dashboard. In some organizations, the space survey team may not be the same individuals as those who make up the space management team, so it's possible that your team might want a dedicated dashboard that is focused on surveying. For now, we'll stick with this combined dash. So let's go ahead and create our space survey campaign. So we can come down to our space survey section here, and you'll see that we have a survey campaigns button. And when we land on the list, you'll see that basically it is empty, and it is telling us that there are no active survey campaigns. So we can go ahead and click on New Campaign to start a new one. So this form is trying to gather the basics about our new campaign, starting with this section here at the top where we can enter a title for our campaign. Beneath that, we have our assignment method. So this is going to dictate how surveyors get assigned to the spaces that they need to survey. By default, it'll be set up as pre-assigned so that we can basically specify ahead of time who will be doing which building or floor. However, we also have the option to mark this as instance-based, and in that case, a coordinator for each instance of the survey campaign can assign the surveyors. Or it can actually be set up as self-serve, where the surveyors come into their own dashboard and have essentially a list of work that they can pick from. And so they can specify which floors that they want to actually go and perform their surveys on. Beneath that is the assignment scope. And so will you be assigning surveyors to the building as a whole or individual floors? And we'll leave that as floor. Everything else on this form is basically a way to narrow down the spaces that are going to be surveyed. So we'll start here in the building filter. We can either say that we're going to pick buildings from the list, or we can specify a filter. If we have a very large number of buildings and our survey campaign is meant to survey more than one building, we may want to use a filter instead. But in this case, we'll leave that as selection, and over on the right in the building list, let's specify that this survey will be looking at the administration building. Finally, down here at the bottom, you'll see that by default, there are 70 spaces that could be surveyed if we leave it as it is. However, we do want to just be looking at our office space in this case. So we'll click on Office. You'll see that now we have a total of 40 spaces that need to be surveyed. So we'll go ahead and hit Save. That'll tell us that our changes have been saved, and it'll bring us back to the list here where our initial campaign has been set up. However, there are still a few things we want to do with this survey campaign before it is ready to be executed out in the field. So let's go ahead and click on our new campaign and click on View Edit. And this is the main information page for this survey campaign. So there are two main things we want to do. We want to assign all of the floors to individual surveyors, and we also want to specify a recurrence pattern for this campaign. So if a campaign is not meant to be executed just once, if it's meant to be executed many times over a week or perhaps 2 weeks, then we want to set up that pattern and specify when the campaign should be executed. But let's start down here in our assignments. So we can click on any of our floors and click Assign. And that gives us the option to specify a surveyor. So this list is the survey team, which can be established on the dashboard as well. And in addition to the surveyor, we have the option to specify some comments if we wanted to. Now when we save that and come back to our main info screen here, you'll see that of course that is now marked as assigned and the surveyor is specified. So we can continue this process until we have all of our floors assigned to surveyors. Okay. So every time one of these surveys is executed, you see that Carol will be responsible for the first floor and Rich will be responsible for the second floor. So again, the last thing we want to do is we want to set up a recurrence pattern. So in general, we're expecting that we're going to execute this at least once per day in order to establish whether space is actually being used as we think it is. So we can come up here to recurrence type and specify daily. Note that if this is some other type of survey, has different purposes, weekly or a manual schedule may be appropriate. Let's specify a date range that this will be executed, and we'll just say our July 3rd through July 7th. We also want to execute this twice per day, so that gives us pretty good coverage to understand whether these spaces are actually being used, and then we can actually specify the times that we want the survey to be done. So let's say 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. So again, giving us pretty good coverage over the course of the day. And once we're ready, we can go ahead and click Create Instances, and that will set up all of our individual instances of this survey campaign. You can see that the dates are specified at the top here, and it tells us who the surveyors are as well as the status. Now by default, despite the fact that this is in the future, it has set up this first one to be in process. That will allow the surveyors to come into their own interface and see this upcoming survey. So next, we'll actually look at what that process is, how the surveyors themselves see the system, and what their process looks like. Now that our survey campaign has been created, assigned, and set up with a recurrence pattern, we can see what this is going to look like from the point of view of a surveyor. Now, I'm logged in as a space manager, so I'm still getting the complete dashboard here with all the different activities and KPIs along the sides. But if your surveyors are going to be lower rights users, those individuals may have a dashboard that is set up just for completing their work. So that might just have the Find section and Space Survey section, for example. But let's go ahead and dive in, and we'll click on Perform Survey. And landing on this list here, it's going to show me all of the different floors that I'm responsible for with this particular survey. So in this case, it's just a single floor, and you can see that it's broken down by building. So this is obviously in the administration building. Also showing on the little card for this survey, you can see that I have 19 spaces to survey, and it is 0% done at the moment. So I can click or tap on that item, click on Survey, and here is the main screen where the surveyors are actually going to be doing their work. So right in the middle, obviously, is our floor plan to be surveyed, and on the right is a panel showing us currently a couple of different queries that are being run against this floor plan. Specifically, at the top here, you can see the status of the spaces. All of them are currently gray, indicating they have not yet been surveyed. There's also a second query that is running to show us spaces that have comments or notes associated with them, and we'll see how that works in a minute. So to actually perform the survey, all we have to do is click or tap on a space, and of course this can be done via a desktop machine, but also via a tablet or a phone or any other web accessible device like this. So as soon as I have a space selected, you'll see that on the right we get a panel that updates with the available statuses as well as a description area. So these statuses may change or be modified based on your organization's needs, but by default we have the not surveyed, and so that's the gray that is currently highlighting all of the spaces. But we also have vacant, occupied, away, indicating that we believe that the space is occupied, but the person is not currently in that space. And then we have two other statuses: inaccessible, meaning that perhaps there was a locked door preventing us from checking, or not applicable. So in our case, we have a survey campaign set up to look at the offices in the administration building. Maybe one of those spaces is not actually an office, and so it is not correctly labeled, and we can just make a note of that here during our survey. So after selecting a space, we can simply click on a status and hit save. And what you'll note is that the space will immediately change color over here on the left in the floor plan. And if we switch over to our legends, you can see that, of course, that is now indicating that that space is in fact vacant. Now, just to point out that the description also does something here. We can click on a space. This is pretty clearly not an office here, so I can say that this is not applicable, and I can just make a note that this in fact is not an office. And so you can see when I push save, not only does the color change for the space, but we also get a little icon indicating that there are notes associated with that space. So now that we understand the basics, let's just quickly run through and mark all of these spaces so we can indicate that the entire floor has been surveyed. Okay, so our complete survey has been done for this floor. And if we switch back now to our legend area, you can see that we do indeed have a variety of different categories here to kind of show off the different ways this might have been completed, indicating that we have a few away spaces, one inaccessible, a couple not applicable, and we also have some occupied and some vacant space. So as a surveyor, our work here is done. Every time a new survey instance needs to be completed, it'll start showing up in our list. But for now, we're done, and we can basically jump forward in time and look at what everything would do once all the information has been completed for the entire campaign. Now that our survey campaign is complete, let's take a look at what we learned and look at one possible way of communicating that information to others. So we'll come down to our survey campaigns, and in the list we'll find the campaign we've been working with, and we'll go to Edit. And here on the info page, we can now go to the top right and find the reporting button. So here we're going to be taking a look at a single campaign summary report meant to accumulate all the information we know and present it in a variety of different ways so that everybody can understand what we've learned. So let's go ahead and click on that and go to View. Now, your organization may have specific needs for what is important to you, and you may also have other preferred ways of presenting it, including charts, gauges, graphs, scorecards, and more. So this is really just one possible way of communicating our findings. So here on our first page, you'll see that we have a campaign summary at the top telling us how many buildings and floors were surveyed. You can see that we surveyed 40 spaces, of which 11 were always unoccupied. You can see that based on the total area surveyed, we can then calculate a total unoccupied area, and using some cost figures associated with the building, we can then actually determine a potential savings if we were able to, in some manner, shed the space that's unoccupied. Down below, you'll see that we have a couple of charts. This one on the left shows us how our space breaks down between occupiable and unoccupiable space. On the right, we see a distribution of our survey scores. So if we move on, we can take a look at one of the floor plans, and this will present all of the individual score categories based on whether a space was always occupied or always vacant, etc. So obviously we start from the red, and these are always unoccupied, always vacant, going up to the green ones that were always occupied. Beneath that, you'll also see that we have the two other categories that are relevant. If a space was always inaccessible, or a space was determined to never really be appropriate for the survey in the first place, Those are also marked here. At the end of the report, we also have a collection of all the comments submitted by the surveyors. So if there's some sort of information that they think is relevant to the survey, they collect that during the survey itself, and that is also presented here.